Also out of PA in Pittsburgh, is it Hamid or?
Hamid.
Hamid. Hi.
Okay.
Sorry for the mispronunciation.
That's okay. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Okay.
What do you got for us?
Well, I wanted to get your opinion on something. You know, I've heard a lot from atheists that, unlike people of belief, people of religion who have a certain thing that they believe in, whether it's God or other tenets of faith, the atheist often says, well, I actually don't have anything to believe in because there's no good evidence, I have my doubts, so I don't have to really offer any substantiation or evidence for my point of view.
Okay.
And so I've heard this a lot, that the onus or the burden of proof
Oh, okay.
is always on
Yes.
the believer.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way you phrased it is kind of one of those things that we hear quite often where atheists have nothing to believe in. That's not true. Atheists believe in all sorts of things. I believe in pretty much, probably most of the things that you believe in, with the exception of a God. What you're talking about is on the subject of belief in gods, do atheists have some burden of proof?
Right.
Yeah, the answer is no. And that's because atheism and theism aren't positions or theism isn't God exists and atheism isn't no God exists. They are both positions on the proposition that a God exists, and theists accept that proposition as true, and atheists reject that proposition as true. It is a complete failure of an understanding of the burden of proof to expect atheists to demonstrate that a God doesn't exist. It's the same reason why in a courtroom the onus is on the prosecution. And so you can really view this as the prosecution has claimed that a God exists, and I'm finding that God not guilty of existing. I don't know for sure if that God is completely innocent of existing. I can't know that. That would be the null hypothesis, the thing that could never actually be demonstrated. And so my vote is not guilty.
Okay. Well, my opinion on this is that atheists do in fact have some burden of proof, because by virtue of saying that, I don't believe in God, in some sense you're saying that I'm going to take the position that there is no God.
No, you don't have to do that.
You're practically
Did you
taking
not
that
just
position.
hear the courtroom analogy? Do you think that the defense has a burden of proof?
Well, no, I mean, the way the legal system is set up is that you are innocent until proven guilty.
Right, and the
Right.
way we evaluate existential claims is that nothing exists until it's demonstrated to exist.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, but there are times where you have to assume that something exists, even if you don't have good evidence.
No, you
No,
don't.
why would you ever do that?
No.
Only because the alternative also becomes less believable. Now, in the case of
No.
atheism,
No.
if
Can
you're-
you
if
give
you're
an
gonna say
example of this?
There is no God.
Can you give an example of this wild-ass assertion you just made?
Okay,
that it's,
I will, and I'll give an example when it
Okay.
comes to theism. If you're going to say that there is potentially, now there are two possibilities, right? There either is God or there isn't, correct?
Correct.
So one of those two has to be true.
Correct.
So if you're going to say, well, I think it's more likely that there is no God, because as an atheist, that's what you're saying. You're saying it's more likely that
No.
there is no
No.
God.
No.
Correct?
No.
No?
No, we've explained to you
So is
that
it
you
more
don't
likely
have to
that there
say
is a
that.
God?
No, what we're saying is that we don't believe.
I understand, but which is more likely in your point of view?
What I'm saying is that you haven't presented evidence sufficient for me to accept your claim that a God exists.
It may be the case.
If you do, I
But
will
that's fine.
believe.
I haven't tried to prove that God exists. I'm
Well,
simply asking
fine
you
then.
what you think is more likely.
The answer is, I don't know. It may be the case that we can't determine which one is more likely. However, if you'd like somebody to defend the case for anti-theism, the position that it's more likely that a God doesn't exist, that can be done too, and I'm happy to do it, but that isn't atheism, and it's not anything that I'm required to do. And I'm very reluctant to allow people to shift the burden of proof, because it is theism that has that burden of proof, because they are making an assertion that the proposition some God exists is true.
But I think you're making that assertion right now to say that the burden of proof is on the theist.
Okay, look, I'm not going to
I think
argue.
you have
No,
two possibilities
stop.
that are mutually
Stop.
exclusive.
Stop.
And if we're going to
Stop, you. Listen to me. There are two possibilities. A God exists or no God exists.
right,
That is about what is actually true. Theism and atheism both address only this one proposition. It is what is your belief about this proposition, much in the same way that the defendant is actually guilty or innocent, but we only address the question of guilt. And you either believe that the defendant is guilty or you do not believe that the defendant is guilty. And saying that you do not believe the defendant is guilty does not mean that you believe the defendant is innocent, and it does not mean that you have made any kind of statement about which is more likely. It means that you have not been convinced of the burden of proof that is on the actual claim. That's it.
Can I discuss that example then that you bring up?
Sure.
All right, so if you have someone who's convicted or accused of a crime, and you would like to take the position that he's innocent until proven guilty. Okay, fine. The burden of proof is on the accuser. And if at the end of the day there isn't strong evidence that the person committed the crime, then you have to take the position, the opposite position, that the person is innocent.
No.
No.
No, you don't.
No.
That's how it works. Whether
No,
it's
that is
not.
not how it
whether
works.
you're 100% sure or not.
Look,
doesn't matter.
no,
No,
that is
it's
not how it works.
Innocent.
No, our courts are not set up to evaluate whether someone is innocent or not. We only evaluate whether someone is guilty or not.
Okay, fine.
If someone
Let's
is-
say, look, fine.
if
I'll
someone
change
is-
my language. Let's just say you take the position that they're not guilty.
Right.
There you
Okay,
go.
so, but
That's it.
practically speaking, did the person commit the crime or not?
We don't know.
We don't know.
And so which is more likely?
We don't know.
We don't know.
You
The-
have no idea?
the verdict, no.
Well, first of all, you're talking about an abstract case, so obviously I have no idea.
Okay, the
But
verdict.
you have no idea.
No, listen to me. The verdict addresses whether the evidence that's presented is sufficient to support a guilty claim. If it is, then you vote guilty. If it isn't, you vote not guilty.
You are making
You do
an-
not determine that someone is
basically
innocent.
then, you'd like to extend the same standard of you have to prove something beyond the shadow of a doubt.
No,
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 You
no.
have to accept that, right?
No, your ass is on hold again. No, please stop putting words in our mouth and please stop spinning off in another direction. Nobody said anything about what the standard of evidence needs to be. Nobody said anything about to an absolute certainty or beyond any reasonable doubt or anything. So don't start
You're
pulling
trying to extend a courtroom standard to the standard.
Are you aware that there are multiple courtroom standards, that there is to a preponderance of the evidence beyond all
Yeah.
reasonable doubt? Are you aware that there's multiple standards in a courtroom?
Okay, well, if you want to take that standard, then beyond reasonable doubt,
No,
reasonable, that's sort of-
no, you idiot. I have not said any standard. You brought up the standard. I'm saying don't. The standard is the part of the conversation we haven't even got to, because you are making the gross error of trying to address two prongs of a dilemma simultaneously. You address one. Do you know what a null hypothesis is? Do you understand why we have a null hypothesis? The null hypothesis, by definition, can never be proven.
Can I say something?
I don't know.
Well, first of all, I do see your point. You're making the point that you haven't discussed the actual standard yet, but simply as to who has the burden of proof. I stand corrected, and I do accept your point there. However, what I'm trying to say is an atheist does also have a belief.
I have lots of beliefs.
Yeah.
No, regarding God.
Do I? How do you know? How do you know that an atheist has a belief regarding God? Well, I tell you what my belief is regarding God. My belief is that the theists have not met their burden of proof.
Well, first of all, why do I have to have a burden of proof anyway?
We just had this conversation.
No, but just let's just take a step back. Why? As a
Because
theist,
you're
why have
asserting
any
that
kind
a
of
God
burden of proof?
exists.
I'm not trying to convince you that God exists. By the
Okay,
way.
then why did you call?
Yeah.
No, I'm just simply challenging you as an atheist because I hear so many atheists think that the standard position is that there is no God.
Correct.
Whoever-
that is the default.
Well, that is discorrect. That's
No, that is not-
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That is not
I'm
correct.
sorry. Would you let me finish? I misspoke when I responded too quickly.
Go
The
ahead.
default position is to disbelieve the claim that a God exists. That's true, whether you're talking about gods, fairies, Loch Ness monsters, or whatever. The default position is not to believe something until there is sufficient evidence for it.
Okay. However, in your default
However.
position that you claim,
There is no
you
however.
do believe something, and you believe.
No.
I
Yes.
do. I do.
You believe
I
that
do.
the universe is possible without a creator. You believe
no.
that the first living cell can come about without some force or entity designing it.
No,
you
you-
don't even have to go there.
How are
No,
those
no.
default?
Oh, for Christ's
See,
sake.
I was saying no because I knew he was going there.
He's on hold. I didn't hang up on him. I wanted to let you finish.
No, all of these other things that you're bootstrapping on to a rejection of your claim that a God exists are completely irrelevant to the claim. This is basic logic 101. If you assert that something exists, you bear the burden of proof of demonstrating that that thing that you assert exists. I bear no burden of proof, and I am perfectly justified in rejecting your claim until you've met your burden.
The stuff that you're trying to attach to this is roughly like saying, oh, well, if you vote not guilty on the defendant, then you actually believe that it's possible that somebody else committed the crime. Well, yeah, I guess so.
That's true.
But that's not anything that I have to demonstrate is actually true, because that you're attempting by 5 different methods here to shift the burden of proof away.
I'm not saying you have to demonstrate that someone else is guilty, but you have to, at the very least, have to acknowledge that by saying this person is not guilty, then chances are, or it's possible, that someone else is guilty. So when you say that, you know, I don't know if God exists, I'm gonna assume he doesn't, or act like or live my life as if he doesn't, then you're opening up all these other possibilities that also are unsupported and are not default positions.
It doesn't matter to the question of whether or not a God exists. That is just another way of attempting to shift the burden of proof. But, as I said, if you want a defense of the anti-theistic position, I'd point out that there have been thousands and thousands and thousands of gods that people have posited, and pretty much everybody rejects all of them except for the one that they cling to. Now, did they have to go around demonstrating that all these other gods were false? No.
No,
Did they have to demonstrate
other gods or multiple gods? They often believe for the standard reasons that people have a certain religion.
Yeah, they don't understand the burden of proof. They don't understand the nature of evidence. They don't understand.
I totally agree with you.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean that you can't distinguish between the different gods and give supporting arguments for one conception over another.
Sure, and there's been lots of arguments for the various different gods posited, and
I think
none of them
all weak except for the belief in a transcendent monotheistic God. I think everything else fails.
And I think that one fails as well.
Yeah.
Would you like to defend that transcendent monotheistic God, or are you just in the business of trying to shirk off the burden of proof?
No, I don't shirk off anything. I'll give you my evidence, and basically it's 2 major arguments. One is the argument from design, and one is the cosmological argument.
Mm-hmm.
So to explain life, especially the first living cell, which is so intricately complex, to just imagine that can evolve randomly from this organic soup, unguided, is ludicrous.
That's called an argument from ignorance fallacy.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
It actually
this is a probabilistic
is.
argument.
No, it's not, because
Yeah,
no, it's not.
absolutely.
No, it's not, because you can't possibly have any data. This is something you can't investigate. You can't determine what the probability of this actually is. You don't have sufficient. You don't have sufficient information to come up with the probability. All you're doing is saying that when I look at all of this, it just seems so improbable without a God. But the God is a magic panacea. Of course it can be used as an explanation for anything. It is used as a cover for ignorance. It is, we don't know how this happened, so I'm going to stick a God in here, and it makes everything work.
No, it's not.
Yes, it absolutely does, because you can also stick in magic does it. And you end up with the exact...
No. It's totally different. It's like a forensic pathologist looking at a deceased person.
No, it's not, because a forensic pathologist has other information. You have exactly one universe, and you cannot go back in time.
What was that?
A forensic pathologist has a large body, a collection of bodies, some of them large, with which to pull together information and a history of information with which to determine the probability of something. They can determine the probability of certain outcomes because we have many, many trials. We have many, many points of data. You have exactly one universe, and you know of one planet on which life exists. You do not have the data set to determine the probability.
But actually we can determine the probability, and that's because we know all the different components of a living cell.
No, you don't.
No,
you don't know everything. You don't know what it was like in the past. You don't know everything that's actually required. And the scientists that have spent time actually studying this and demonstrating that it's possible for the building blocks of life to arise from purely naturalistic from purely naturalistic causes disagree with you. So why haven't you gone out and got a Nobel Prize to solve this?
You know for a fact, and I do, that the most brilliant scientific minds these days cannot, in a laboratory, put together a cell from the known building blocks. You cannot synthesize a cell. How does that happen?
Which is absolutely irrelevant, because that's not how cells arise. Our inability to reproduce something has no bearing on the discussion at all. That's like, and plus you're doing it as if we are now at the pinnacle of scientific knowledge. What if we're not at the pinnacle of scientific knowledge, which I'd argue that we're not? That's like saying that only God can make a baby. There's no way for a sperm to get inside an egg cell other than God. Well, guess what? We got lots and lots of ways of doing it now. You're starting.
You very well know that a building cannot be built by itself or a car
Correct.
by itself.
Yes.
You can't just throw parts together.
Correct. But do you know how?
You can't do
Correct.
that. It doesn't happen that way. It's
Correct.
improbable.
Correct. It's not just improbable. I'd go so far as to say that it is practically impossible. Do you know why? Do you know how you recognize that a building was built? Because we have evidence of buildings being built. Because all of the evidence that we have shows certain structures are built. And we have no evidence that these structures arise on their own. We also have no evidence that these structures have any mechanism for self-replication, which does not apply to life.
Matt, here's the key. Here's the key with recognizing design. It's that if you see it, you know it's there. You don't.
Wrong. You recognize design not because of complexity and not because you see it. You recognize design by contrasting it with nature. X occurs naturally. Y does not occur naturally. Y is recognized as designed. All this recognition is by contrast. Everything that we do is comparative. And so we recognize design by contrasting it with what is naturally occurring. And life is naturally occurring.
Matt, I think you very well know that design is very recognizable, and it's only because you don't want to see the argument, you want to refuse it, that you deny certain things.
No. And thank you for implying that I'm being dishonest. Let me tell you what's actually happening. What happens is I understand that people see design all over the place where there's no design, where there's no intellect behind it. We are programmed to see design because it's evolutionary beneficial. I don't not see design because I'm trying to avoid an argument. I see design, and I see people who are so enamored of this idea of, oh, we just see design everywhere. You're so infatuated with your intuition and the fact that it is most often right. We live our lives by induction and inference, and it is great because today is pretty much the same as yesterday, and the things that we recognize and deal with today is pretty much similar to what we've dealt with in the past. And this is a great way to go about things, except for when it fails. And that is that inductive reasoning and inference lead us to become overly infatuated with our ability to spot things, and you don't know why you spot them. Matter of fact, your claim is that we just recognize design, we just intuit design, we just feel design. No, we don't. We recognize design for reasons, and if you investigate, you can figure out what those reasons actually are.
I think you've sort of lost me there with that last part, to be honest.
Okay.
And speaking of panaceas, when you say, oh, we were evolved to think this way or to recognize design, I think that's just an assertion that's baseless, to be honest.
So, no, actually, we have pretty good evidence that
we've
evolved
are you like
as pattern-seeking.
I'm sorry. I assumed. I'm sorry. I assumed that you accept evolution just generally, because
I accept evolution in the sense that creatures, animals, living beings did change over time, no question. But as to the mechanism, that's very much in doubt. And in fact,
there's no doubt about the mechanism.
There is doubt.
Okay.
There's not.
Like don't tell me.
You have doubts. The scientific community doesn't have doubts about natural selection.
I'm sorry?
You may have doubts. The scientific community has no doubt about natural selection. Or, well, I won't say no doubt. I suppose there's some outlying possibility that natural selection could be turned on its head, but don't make it out. Oh my gosh, let me finish. Don't make it out like there's significant doubt or even noticeable doubt about the fact of evolution and the process of natural selection, because there's not.
Again, I don't doubt natural selection for 1 second. What I doubt, and seriously doubt, is that natural selection and mutation can bring about new organs, new creatures, new species. That is
Why would you doubt
Why?
that when we've demonstrated speciation in the lab? And what is it about this? Do you just not think there was enough time? Because certainly little changes would have to add up over time.
It's not just that there's enough time. I think if you had all the time in the world, I think it really comes down to probability. If something is highly improbable, it becomes practically impossible.
See, you're
No,
just
no,
so...
see-
Unless it is being guided. That's just
Natural
how I see the world.
selection.
That's how a lot of
Natural
people see the world.
selection is what guides it.
That's
Natural selection is not random.
Yeah. The mutations that occur are random.
Argument.
The mutations that occur are random. Natural selection is not random. Natural selection is also not guiding towards a goal, it's just selecting. But the process of change is such that it filters those things, much as a bunch of sieves with different sized holes in them will filter marbles. There's no mind involved in that, but yet you get this good distribution. Your assertion that that kind of change has to be guided is something that you would need to demonstrate. But as somebody who avoids their burden of proof, I don't think you're going to do that. Because one of the things about this claim that evolution needs some intelligent guide is that you can't possibly demonstrate this.
Well, no, I don't doubt that that needs a guide. The process you're describing is a very acceptable process to me. But I think that can only result in microevolution, and that's the only thing we've demonstrated.
There's no difference. There's no difference between.
To say that that can lead to
No,
macroevolution.
No.
There's no
speculation.
difference. It's all just evolution.
It's all
No, it's a major difference. See, that's,
No,
that's
there
it's
isn't.
not.
No, microevolution.
No, no,
is-
No,
listen.
the only difference is time.
And if you
That's
talk
it.
if you talk to a biologist, ask them about the difference between micro and macroevolution, and they'll tell you there's no difference. It's the same thing.
Well, maybe you don't understand the difference then. Microevolution.
No,
can only-
I understand how creationists misuse those terms.
Macroevolution.
Well, you know you're on hold, right?
You know, that doesn't happen.
No, he
You
doesn't.
know you
he's
don't know you're on hold.
No.
Okay. We don't need you to explain micro and macroevolution to us because we already understand it. And
Yeah.
it's clear that you don't, at least in the sense that you think that there's some hard line separating the two. Have you looked at, for example, the different dog species that are out there in the last 10,000 years, everything from huge Great Danes to tiny little dogs with crappy legs that are probably going to die because we've bred them a specific way? Now that's 10,000 years, roughly, that we've had dogs. Have you looked at the difference that we've seen in breeding different birds? Now, yes, you can do what creationists all do and say, okay, well they're all dogs or they're all birds.
Yeah, they're the same kind.
And yet, is wolf the same kind as a dog? I don't know, because kind doesn't mean anything in science, and that's the term that creationists often use. But the fact of the matter is, if we can do that in 10,000 years, and you don't think that bigger changes can take place over millions of years, that's just a failure of your imagination, and it's a failure to recognize the actual evidence, both in fossils and in genetics, that fully support evolution.
Well, I think being rational is to restrain your imagination in some sense.
No.
Dogs have been bred, by the way. This difference that you're citing is a deliberate act by intelligent beings, which is the humans who have bred these animals. And again, they're still dogs. So that is microevolution, and that's not even evolution, by the way, but it's a micro phenomenon as opposed to macroevolution. Totally different ballgame.
Wait a minute. It's a change in the frequency of genes over time,
Right.
which is the definition of evolution.
Well, that broad definition does not cite a mechanism, and
it's
so
not
therefore
a-
that's acceptable
No,
by
no, no, no.
unless you're totally irrational, that's acceptable by everybody. It's the mechanism
No,
really
no.
that's doubt.
No, listen.
Yes.
Evolution is the change in gene frequency over time. There are mechanisms that drive that. There's natural selection, artificial selection, sexual selection. There's all kinds of selection pressures that can drive evolution.
Right.
Artificial selection, which is what we do when we breed dogs for a specific purpose, we are doing what nature does. We are just replicating what nature does.
No, nature doesn't have any foresight. It doesn't say, well, we need dogs that
Correct.
Correct.
are stronger
Exactly.
or bigger
So
or
you do
longer. So it doesn't do
understand
that.
evolution is an unguided process.
Right.
What happens is what selection pressures dictate.
Okay, well, if you're saying it's unguided, I'm saying that there's no way it can explain the speciation
And
we
yet
have
it
today.
does.
And yet it does.
You're asserting
yet-
it does. That's
No,
what
no,
I'm questioning. I'm
there's-
saying if this
Listen,
happened,
listen
as
to
you
me.
say,
No, no, no.
Listen to me.
Your assertion is that it can't, and you need to actually demonstrate that. Demonstrate that it
and the
can't.
power to guide.
Not
All
only
right.
that, but that evolution happened and that it continues to
Oh, he
happen
accepts
is a
that.
fact.
I'm
That's a
saying,
fact.
I'm saying that your assertion that evolution can't explain this is one that you need to demonstrate.
Yes, that can be demonstrated with probability.
So
because-
where's your Nobel Prize then?
Where's my Nobel Prize?
Yeah, because you would
Well, maybe
you would
I'll have it later.
absolutely win a Nobel Prize if you overturn evolution.
Yeah, and
By
so
the
would,
way, that's never going to be a criteria for knowing what is a true belief or correct
Right.
position as to who gets Nobel Prize, especially if
Well,
the
no, but-
scientific community is already bent on this evolutionary concept.
You know why?
and now
Yes.
you're done. No, you're done. If you're going to start asserting that there's some kind of grand conspiracy, then you
No,
are.
it's not a conspiracy. No, that's not at all what I'm saying. But
That is exactly
there are
what you're
certain
saying when you
institutions-
imply that the scientific community is bent on something, so nobody with that opposing view is going to be taken seriously. They'll be taken seriously just as soon as there's evidence, and you need to ask yourself, why has nobody been able to produce this evidence? This is the Nobel Prize is just a little snark comment. The fact of the matter is that the intelligent design community, as they like to call themselves, has presented us bupkis. They have not been able to demonstrate anything. They've even gone out and set up their own journals so that they can start claiming that they have peer-reviewed journals, but journals are only as good as the peers.
Look, Matt, it's easy to blackball people and block them out, and
And see-
this
and
is
there
not
you
to
go.
say that there's a conspiracy.
go.
That's just
That's
too,
exactly what
That's
you're
exactly
saying.
what
too
you're
fantastic
saying.
of a statement. No, but you have ingrained institutions, and that's just the way things work. If
Yes,
you're going to
the
be an
scientific
outsider,
method
you're
is
not going to get
ingrained
funding,
in
you're not going
higher
to get promoted. That's
education.
just how it works. So nobody
Look,
seriously
if
is going
you-
to promote these.
If you think for a second, that somebody with a testable hypothesis to overturn evolution would not immediately become incredibly well-funded, and the religious groups alone, the Templeton Foundation,
Yeah.
would pay millions for that.
I know that the independent funding, though, that's not what a lot of academics want. They want validation through the academic community. It's just a different
You
world.
think you wouldn't get validation if you overturned evolution?
If you actually provided actual evidence and data that overturned the model for any discipline of science, I mean,
Listen, by the way, nobody's going to be in a hurry to overturn evolution from a scientific standpoint because it does happen to be practically the only naturalistic explanation for the universe, or at least life on Earth, and that is valuable for science. I think that's fine to have theories like that, but as a rational being, I'm just not going to accept whatever the scientific community forces upon me. If I don't believe it, it's
No
just
one's
not
forcing it
believable.
on you.
no one's forcing it on you, and
People know, but they like to teach it like it's dogma. You've claimed that it's
It
a fact
is-
already on your show.
evolution
It's not
is a fact.
Yeah.
Evolution
Well, okay, if it's
evolution is a fact. Things change.
evolution, they're implying
Wow.
a mechanism that is naturalistic, unguided. That's the problem. That's what I
Yes,
disagree with.
because
Okay.
there's no
And
evidence.
if now that you
of any
disagree with
other
it,
force
come up with
guiding
some
it.
evidence that it's wrong. That's the way things work. You realize that.
Well, no, I mean, it's the same reason people conclude that someone was murdered. You say, what is the probability of this person dying naturally? When you find that the
No,
probability
that's not
is
how
so
we-
low, you conclude that they must have been murdered. That's
No,
that's
no,
not how
no,
you
no,
determine
no.
someone's
Have you
been
like never
murdered?
watched CSI or anything? What little pocket of the universe are you in where you think that we just look and say, oh, well, you know, it doesn't look like they could have died by natural causes, so somebody must have murdered them. No, that's not how we actually go about it.
Ourselves?
We
You don't
actually,
need to- I don't
oh,
need
for
to-
Christ's sake, you're done. Bye.
Thank you for ending that.
No, we don't actually just say, well, we can't figure out how they could have died of natural causes, so looks like it's a murder.
Yeah.
Da, da, da. Oh, where's my glasses?
Yeah.
Looks like he's done evolving. Pow! CSI. Okay, so
Holy cow.
monstrously long call on
Yeah.
evolution and managing to get most of it wrong, and all of it having nothing to do with, well, actually, from his point of view, it does have something to do with it, because if you're an atheist then you believe that it's possible that there's a universe and a wealth of diverse creatures without guidance. I don't have any problem with saying that I not only think it's possible, I think that that's probably the best explanation. We never really got around to defending the anti-theistic position, which, you know, if you want to call back and pay attention, I'd be happy to actually do that, because I think it's kind of straightforward.
Yeah. Well, and one aspect of the anti-theist position is if you take what it says in Genesis, for example, about the order of creation, and you compare it to what we know about evolution.
Hey, they got that wrong.
They got that totally wrong.
Yeah.
And there's actual evidence to back up the evolution side of it. So,
Yeah, it's really difficult. By the way, we're out of time. They put up the list of people who actually make the show happen. The rest of us just show up and talk. But we'll see you next week. I won't be here. I'll be in Denver for a convention. And maybe we'll talk more about anti-theism the next time I'm back on.